On October 7th, Hamas militants launched a surprise attack on Israeli towns, killing 1,200 people and taking 240 others hostage, according to Israeli Defense Forces. Since Israel launched retaliatory strikes in Gaza, more than 22,700 people have been killed, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. And now there are fears of a widening conflict after senior Hamas leader was killed in a drone strike in Beirut, Lebanon last week. Israel has not confirmed whether it was behind that attack. But on Saturday, the Iran-backed Lebanese militia group Hezbollah traded fire with Israeli forces as Hezbollah vows retaliation for that assassination. To try to de-escalate tensions, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is again in the region with stops planned in Israel, the occupied West Bank, and 4 Arab nations. Joining me now on set, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense. Jeremy, thank you for coming back.
Good morning.
To the Sunday show. Before we get to Israel-Hamas, let's talk about the big news today, and that is the news that Secretary Austin was in the hospital for days before the White House even knew about it. Can your reaction to this news?
Yeah, well, first, I think the important thing here is that the chain of command was never broken. There was no issue, as far as we can tell, that somehow the Secretary of Defense or his deputy were not able to transmit orders to troops in the field. You know, when I worked at the Pentagon, I saw that there's a lot of redundancy around the secretary. He's always with a communicator. He's always with a security detail. So even if he was having a private medical procedure, I think we can be assured that the chain of command and national security was always protected. I know Lloyd Austin. I know Kath Hicks, his deputy, and they are veterans of the department. They know how to make sure that national security is protected.
All right, and that's great when it comes to the Pentagon. But what about the disconnect in the communication between the Pentagon and folks inside the White House who should know?
Yeah, first, Lloyd Austin is a pretty private person, so I know the media was upset that they didn't put out a release about his medical condition. But he doesn't talk to the media even when there's important news, let alone private medical news. I think with respect to the White House, Jonathan, you know, all I can say is if I would have been there, I might have touched base with the White House. But again, I think this is probably going to blow over, and I think we need Secretary Austin because, as I think we're going to talk about in a minute here, he is, and the Defense Department is a linchpin in America's strategy in the Middle East. We've been conducting kinetic strikes against Iranian-backed forces. There's a whole Red Sea campaign to defend shipping, and Secretary Austin is right at the heart of that. So
then let's talk more about it, because Secretary Blinken is back in the region for, I think, the 4th time or so since October 7th. What's the purpose of this trip, do you think?
Well, I think the key thing is on Israel's northern border, where obviously Hezbollah occupies a lot of territory in southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah, remind you, Jonathan, is a much more capable military force than even Hamas. If Hamas has about 50,000 rocket, artillery, and mortar pieces, Hezbollah probably has 250,000 rocket, artillery, and mortar pieces. And they are a fully owned proxy of Iran. And so if Hezbollah is firing weapons into northern Israel, which is what they've done, and hundreds of thousands of Israelis have had to move south and be displaced from Israel's north, then the U.S. is there to try to put pressure on all the countries in the region to say, hey, we've got to rein Hezbollah in. We don't want to have another northern front for Israel to fight in this war.
We don't want to have another northern front, but, I mean, they've been firing rockets over Israel's northern border since basically the war began. Is that already a front? And how worried is the United States that fears of a widening conflict are actually becoming the reality, that the conflict has widened?
I think this is a very significant concern. And the way I frame this, Jonathan, is in a sense, the U.S. and Israel are fighting the same war. And if you look across the region, the U.S. had to deploy 2 carrier strike groups to the Middle East to deter Hezbollah. We have had to conduct kinetic strikes against Iranian-based proxies in Syria and Iraq because on 150 occasions since October 7th, Iranian-based proxies and surrogates and terrorists have attacked American bases at al-Assad, at al-Tanaf, across the Middle East, in Iraq and Syria. We have had to engage a whole international coalition to protect shipping in the Red Sea, where about 15% of the world's commerce flows through the Red Sea, ultimately flowing through the Suez Canal. And so the U.S. is in this fight alongside its ally Israel to prevent Iran and its surrogates and proxies from triggering a wider war.
The United States the United States is alongside its ally Israel, but there's a report in the New York Times about the tense conversations that have been had between Secretary Blinken and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The United States is alongside, but are they working together? Because if you read that New York Times report, Blinken goes in there with specific asks and requests, and the Prime Minister basically says, forget about it.
Yeah, look, I think that's par for the course, and I've been involved in many conversations with our closest allies and partners, whether they're in Europe or the Indo-Pacific or the Middle East. And for the most part, you have strong alignment. We, the United States, are providing Israel with many things. We're providing them with advice. We're providing them with intelligence. We're providing them with weapons. We are fully backing their war against Hamas, because if you believe in a two-state solution, if you want to see the realization of a Palestinian state, if you want to see the realization of peace, you have to degrade Hamas. Hamas is an opponent of the two-state solution. So that's the U.S. posture. Now, yes, behind closed doors in private, are there going to be some tactical conversations about rules of engagement, about weaponeering, about what the Israeli government should transmit about a post-war day-after scenario? Yes, there's probably some daylight, but not much. And I think the larger story here is that Israel, in some ways, is carrying out America's national security agenda in the Middle East as well, because we don't want to see Hamas spread. We don't want to see Hezbollah launch a northern front. We don't want to see fighting break out in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in the Red Sea, in Yemen. We have an interest in deterring Iranian-based surrogates, proxies, and terrorist organizations from attacking us and our allies. Let me just remind viewers, Jonathan, that on October 7th, it wasn't just 1,200 Israelis who were killed, as you noted in your setup. 50 Americans were killed. More than 14 Americans were taken hostage. And at this hour, there are still 6 Americans being held hostage: Sigai, Itai, Idan, Omer, Hirsch, and Keith. 6 Americans are still being held hostage. This, in many respects, Jonathan, is our fight, too.